In the wild north of Vancouver, nestled along the Chinatown drag of Main Street nightlife, you may find, if you are lucky, a weathered little hotel and pub beneath a ragged Coke sign splattered over the ancient white bricks. Should you stop in, order a cider, politely decline a meat pie, and listen closely to the locals with your eyes low and drink in hand. Here in Ivanhoe, somewhere amongst the smoky haze and the odor of an unwashed restroom, floats whispers of a six-piece punk band that passed through this bar in years gone by. And their name was the Dreadnoughts. The Dreadnoughts are a clusterfull punk band out of Vancouver, Canada, currently comprised of 6 members. The Fang, Wormly Wankersnitch, Leroy Slowride McBride, Dread Pirate Droozle, Squid Vicious, and the Stupid Swedish Bastard. Those aren't their real names, but that's not important. Since the band formed in 2007, they've been rocking hard with a sound somewhere between polka, street punk, pirate, Celtic, and European folk. It's an odd mix, for certain, but if you give it a chance, they may just surprise you. 4 of their first 5 albums are
certified hood classic.
And while I won't be speaking on Cider Punks Unite, I will talk about their second most recent project, Foreign Skies. 2017's Foreign Skies was a concept album based on the First World War. Now you might wonder why a late 2000s punk band would make a concept album centered around a century-old international conflict. And rightfully so. Compared to their earlier discography, this was completely out of left field. But to understand why it was made, we have to go back to a rather dark time. 2011. In 2011, the Dreadnoughts were coming off of their largest tour ever, having covered an impressive 180 shows throughout 2010. And quite frankly, they were tuckered out. The life of a rock star, however small time, is draining on the body and mind, especially for these 20 to turning into their 30s-year-olds. They needed a break and announced an indefinite hiatus, beating out MCR by a good 2 years. Nicholas Smith, or The Fang, the founder and central figure of the band, took advantage of his spare time by turning to 2 of his passions, music and philosophy. See, in his time with the band, jolly old Saint Nick had come to gain an appreciation for a wide variety of tunes. Queen and Americana, Mongolian throat singing, traditional Polish ballads, the entire Assassin's Creed Black Flag soundtrack. Anything. Sing it and they will come. But if there was one era that he just could not vibe with, it was the music from the turn of the century. No, not the 90s, I mean the previous century. To paraphrase, it just sounded so stupid, eh? Too confident, too cheesy, just simple and naive stuff that was completely unlike anything that followed it. He could get into ancient folk ditties, but this was not it. But Nicki Minaj was a rather smart man, and he knew that something big had to have happened to create such a paradigm shift in the pop music of this era. Something really big. World War I was many things, a tragedy thereamong. A wake-up call. Before the war, everything was relatively big and bright and beautiful. The 1800s has seen some major shakeups at the Industrial Revolution, the Civil War, and other key socio-political changes, and with that all settled out, people were confident that the world was going somewhere. They were excited to see what it had in store, and their music reflected that. But the Great War changed everything. The culmination of man's technological advancement and a series of increasingly larger political dominoes created a disaster unlike anything seen before it, and few things seen since. It introduced a sense of cynicism into the populace, and the purely optimistic worldview that had dominated before was completely shattered. This is why the Fang couldn't sink his teeth into the 1910s. He wanted to explore this cultural schism, and to shed some light on this monumental shift in the planet's music dynamics. And so, the seeds of Foreign Skies were sown. Together, the Dreadnoughts set sail for a week-long retreat, recorded some songs, and released their first album in 7 years, once again, beating out MCR by about 2 years. Foreign Skies, the album, not the song, was written in mind with the goal of telling the story of the war from multiple perspectives. The women's suffrage movement, the many townspeople steamrolled by the European war machines, and, most prominently, the soldiers of both sides. The album opens with Up High, a war chant calling to arms the men of the land to face down their enemy in this time of need. But the song does not decry the other side for the battle yet to come. No. There is an understanding between these words, an unspoken statement of sorrow and apology for their adversaries, who they know, at heart, had as little of a say in this matter as they did. When they are calling to their brothers, it is not just those from their own nation, but in recognition of the brotherhood between both sides. They pray for their fathers and those who came before, that they will watch in this time of need, for the men that they will slay, that this could have been another way, and for the honor of their dead, that they will know peace from this trial. And as their chant of remembrance is drowned by the piercing somber of a violin, the titular track of the track opens stage with a rather tasty guitar riff. In stark contrast to the gloom seen previously, Foreign Skies, the song, not the album, is lively, full of bodacious punk energy that the Dreadnoughts are known for. For these are the men of sweat and steel. They will march onward for their families through these abandoned fields underneath these unknown horizons. Though they know that a fair few will fall in the fight, they are confident that their efforts will be successful and any suffering short and succinct. For there is nothing here but happiness and duty's restless call. But as the song carries on, it becomes more apparent that what awaits will be much longer lasting. The Battle of Liège delayed the invading German forces by 5 days' time, and as the war opened, the first cracks were showing in the facade of confidence that the nations of the world had built up over the last century. Daughters of the Sun can be summarized best by the description included with the track's listing on the CD version of the album. The militant suffragette movement was stopped dead in its tracks by the outbreak of the war. Yet those most intimately involved in the movement suspected that women could never return to their utterly subordinate position in society after it was all over. They were right. This song is a tribute to those incredible women who fought, and won, their own war. On several occasions, German forces from the French front had nearly captured Paris with a French press, which surely would have left the French toast. However, the consistent exhaustion of the advance left the French fried. Left the Germans fried. And so they stopped at captured cities like Amiens to party on French wine and to have a French time. Amiens Polka captures a rare moment of joy in the war, as the soldiers break out the accordion for some good fun with the locals. The romp and stomp of the rowdy Germs set to the violin and some modern drums is something really to behold. Thoroughly enjoyable, especially as the only instrumental piece on the track, if you discount the German chorus halfway through the song. Pulling a 180, the Dreadnoughts go from one end of their palette to the other, dropping instrumentation in favor of some good old-fashioned sea shanties. Well, they did write them themselves, so it's not that old-fashioned. Written from the perspective of English and Australian regiments en route to Gallipoli, the Bay of Suvla captures the high mood of the crew. It's a good example of how the Dreadnoughts choose to preserve the spirit of their inspiration, taking care to emulate the style, meter, and theming of traditional water songs, while also staying accurate to the events of the war. Gallipoli was a bloodbath, and the botched operation was one of the largest failures for the Allied powers during the war. With this retrospective view, the Bay of Suvla is almost somber in its telling of the calm that came before the storm. Speaking of tragedies of warfare and seafare, the Annamaria was a mid-sized fishing vessel owned by one John Lagasse. One of the side effects of this new scale of war was the rapid advancement of technology to fuel the campaign, such as the first military usages of airplanes, tanks, flamethrowers, and in this case, submarines. Annamaria describes the fallout from the sinking of Lagasse's ship by a German U-83, and John's subsequent vow of revenge against the apparent pirates who had killed his dearest Wood. However, the nature of war had changed, and the outdated view of these measures of naval warfare as piracy were a demonstration of the ways in which old frames of view were quickly dying out. The next two songs continue this frame of the changing battlefield. Jericho calls to mind the ancient city destroyed by the Israelites as they marched through a wasteland carrying the Ark of the Covenant, using the biblical metaphor to contrast the resistance the Germans faced in their advance through Belgium and France. Black and White takes the Bible and the war in a different direction, describing the devil's playground that had been set up in the trenches of the European countryside. Chemical warfare, trench foot, mud, disease, and madness were aplenty, as the soldiers below ground took on a new mode of existence. The lack of empathy for the troops on both sides is called into question with the near final line. Who gave him his final round? Who did he trust, sir? Perhaps one of the most thought-provoking and creative songs on the track is the one named for the man who pulled the choke on this war machine.
Hello, my dear old friend.
Gavrilo tells of the Bosnian nationalist who, by pure chance, had succeeded in a convoluted assassination attempt on the Austrian Archduke Ferdinand. With as many coincidences that occurred to lead to the murder in front of that sandwich shop, it was almost appear that the young Gavrilo Princip had struck a deal with the devil to make it happen. And so here, as he rots away in his cell, Prince's conspirator comes to pay a visit and collect. My personal vision of this series of events would see Gavrilo witness the full consequences of his actions, from the events during the Great War, to the genocides by Nazi forces in his beloved home of Bosnia in World War II, to the ravages of the Holocaust and the atomic bombings of Japan, to the millions of lives lost in the Vietnam, Korean, and Middle Eastern wars, to the communist revolutions in Asia, and the continued turmoil around the globe that is still felt today. And, as he is dragged to hell following a lonely death from tuberculosis, the last thing he sees is the crooked little grin of a serpent fully embroiled in its element.
Gavrilo!
But then, we're away from it all. A Broken World is a reading of Amy Lowell's poem, September 1918. Its dark piano and tweeting birds call to mind a place unscarred by the violence that has stained life in the war, with the pureness of simple childhood joys being recalled and held to by a woman endeavoring to balance herself upon a broken world. It's at an odd place in the album, not the final song of the track, not the opening, and not quite in the middle either. Fitting enough for the odd place that many found themselves in during these a-changing times. It's a reminder of what was lost in those 4 fateful years. Black Letters speaks to this even more so. The soldiers who died in that war were sons of mothers, husbands to wives, and scarcely old enough to be called men. Yet, in this incredible violence, they were cast aside and promptly forgotten. The only thing that remained were the messages that they wrote home. Small glimpses of a life caught in dark ink. As the Canadian soldier who inspired this song wrote,
By the time you read these words, there will be no more war for me. There will be only peace.
Back Home in Bristol is the final song of Foreign Skies. It is, in some ways, a requiem, a call of remembrance for what and who was cast aside over these 4 long years. Again, I'll read the notes in the track listings. All armies on all sides executed their own soldiers for cowardice or for disobeying orders. They remained criminally unaware of the psychological damage that this new form of warfare was doing to the people that they had just lined up and shot. As a man guilty of shell shock and desertion awaits his execution, he relays his last desires to a priest delivering his last rites. He describes in terror the green grime and smoke, and how all he could think of was his home back in the West Country, back in Bristol. Almost as if we could hear his memory or his imagination in that moment, in fades the shouting chorus of a battalion of soldiers heading home from the war's and the album's final conclusion. And as he's led to his fate, he leaves just one final request for the holy man. A final taste of rum, and to make sure that they mark Bristol on his grave. And after 43 minutes of Canado-European clusterfolk, we've wrapped up one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century with what I'd say is one of the best punk albums of the 2010s. I mean, good enough that I'd buy the signed CD copy, despite not owning a CD player. After examining these 13 tracks, it's apparent to see that Nick and his crew definitely put forth their full effort for this. The attention to detail, the careful selection of the obscure realities of life in World War I, the dedication to telling as many stories as possible, as accurate as possible. The Dreadnoughts brought all of their influences front and center to combine into an experience that demonstrates their passion for their craft and their desire to do right by those who had come before. To quote from Stoked, the promotional documentary for this album's release, "Don't add punk to it in a way that takes it to somewhere that it doesn't belong, or in a way that does violence to what it is." Foreign Skies is about showing respect for a bygone era, to take the lessons learned by a lost generation and bring them to the forefront in a manner digestible by a new audience. It's a unique experience for a unique band, and if you care anything about punk, history, or music in general, you should give them a listen. While some spots are rough around the edges, as is the nature of punk, I promise it won't disappoint. In conclusion, war bad, cider good, we're all human, and Polka never dies. Thanks for watching. This is the part where I tell you to like the video and subscribe. Despite how demeaning it sounds to you, my lovely and amazing audience, psychology shows that you're more likely to subscribe if I tell you to do it. So go on then. Do it. Bet you won't watch these other videos either. Nerd.